We are excited because on Saturday, December 2nd, 2023, we get to have a virtual workshop with Alton Takiyama-Chung. Yay! And it is entitled Finding the Heart of the Story, Crafting Historic Stories. And I don't know if you, while listening to this, have ever seen or heard Alton perform historical pieces, but they are definitely inspiring. And this is not one to be missed. I can say that. He might be too shy to say that, but I will say he is inspiring. And so we want to find out, how did you even go on this path to develop historical pieces? Because you do a lot of research and a lot of work.
Well, certainly researching is one of my passions. And when I was first starting out, maybe in the storytelling for maybe a couple of years, I got this wild hair. I said, I want to go and tell the story of the 100th Battalion and the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, which is the all Japanese American unit that fought in Europe during World War II. And I had an uncle, or he's a close friend of the family. I called him Uncle. And I called him up and I said, I know that you are a sergeant in E Company, and I want to do a story of the 442nd. Can I interview you? And he said, no, 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 no. It's been 60 years. I'm still trying to forget. And I went, okay, I backed off. And I started doing lots and lots of research. And I came up with my version of the story. And I was invited to the 65th reunion of the 442nd to tell their story back to them. So members from the Pentagon are there. Danny Noy, Senator Danny Noy is in the audience. And my before the show, my uncle comes up and he says, oh yeah, Hill 140. I was there, and I looked at him and said, Hill 140. That's where Ted Tenoy won the Medal of Honor by basically charging up the hill by himself and taking the hill away from the Germans. He said, yeah, I was there. You see this one leg? It's always shorter than the other. I got hit in the leg. I was evac'd out. I missed all that stuff about saving the lost battalion. But yeah, I was there. And he turns and he talks to his friends. And his wife, who I call my aunt, he comes up to me and says, I've been married to that man for 55 years. This is the first I've heard of any of this stuff. And so that was my clue, saying, okay, these guys are of that generation where if it's really good, you don't have to say anything, because if you do, that's called bragging.
Mm.
And so I said, I want to honor, because when growing up in Hawaii, these guys were like, everyone just kind of treated them with great respect. And I kind of understood a little bit about it, but it wasn't until I did a lot of research and could tell the story that I realized what these guys had really done and the significance of what their contribution to, Japanese Americans across the country. And so that was kind of my impetus into going and telling historic stories. And that opened many doors. People said, oh, you do this stuff? Well, here's some other stories you can go and tell. Or have you considered maybe doing research and, telling these types of stories? So, for the open the door for the Okinawans, people before, during, and after the Battle of Okinawa, in Okinawa and Japan. Here's some of their stories. Or go and interview these people. And I've just been, following the breadcrumbs. And now it feeds one of my passions. I love doing research. I love doing writing. Performing is actually kind of down the list, but I really enjoy, just
But you eventually
learning
get
about these
there.
things.
You do get to the performing part.
Eventually, but like I said, it's
Eventually.
not one of the primary reasons of why I do this. It's really because I'm curious and I want to learn more. And as in part of this whole workshop is taking a story that I had to create and telling you, here's a story and here's the backstory of how I created that story. Here's my process and here's the pitfalls and things you got to watch out for, and here's how you can find your way into a story. I mean, history is just a bunch of facts, and yeah, there's stories, but how do you breathe life into it? As a teller, what is your connection to the story? And we'll try and help you find your connection to whatever story that you're passionate about telling. And from that perspective, how you might be able to go and look at that story through new eyes and be able to go and maybe think about what gift you want to give to the audience by even telling this story. That's kind of where we're going with all this stuff.
Well,
Um,
exactly, is finding that gift, because you coming to the workshop, everybody, you will need to decide what kind of historical piece are you thinking about. It doesn't have to be super detailed, but just at least a inkling of an idea, maybe at least a decade, an era, a century. I don't know. So, something like that. How does someone? There's so much history. I mean, it just by living, there's even more history happening. So, Alton, how are these people supposed to even decide and narrow in on one? I mean, it's almost like what's your favorite historical thing you want to do? I mean, how do you suggest that someone actually make a little bit of a choice, even for at least the workshop, not for what's crafted later, but just for this?
Yeah, if you have an interest in something, or if it's a family story that you have that has, you know, how your grandparents may have come to this country, or what was going around at the time, of an era that you thought I'm really attracted to. Could be the Napoleonic Wars for all I know. It could be, the Vietnam War. I don't know. Just something that you're feeling that, yeah, it's I have a connection to this story. It can be, you can have a full-blown story, you can have a notion, you can have just an idea of something. What we want to do is, because you're going to have something, a story calls to you, it's a connection. There's something about this story that resonates with you that makes you say, I want to tell this story. That's your clue. And if you have that, then I can give you some ideas of how to winnow down and figure out what it is that's so important to you about that story. And once you figure out why that story is important to you, then you can look at it from that perspective, saying, okay, this is important to me because now, from that perspective, how can I construct that story? How do I tell that story? And from that place, what gift do I want to be able to offer to the audience at the end of the story?
Right.
Those are the types of questions that interest me, and they are clues of how you might be able to construct your story, how you might be able to look at the research, how you might want to be able to present that story. And that's what I talk about, finding the heart of the story. This is true for any story you want to tell, but specifically about historic stories, because lots of times stories are just a bunch of facts. It's kind of dry. But this is a way of how to go and bring you into that story, your connection, your energy. And from that is how makes the story interesting. Because if it's interesting to you, if you feel passion for it, it's going to be passionate and interesting for the audience.
And then I mean, once you have that idea, then you have to find the places that will resonate with that as well. I mean, you've done these pieces, and how often have you crafted and then reached out to get it performed versus having a grant or something that was a collaboration? So just a quick little thing about what have you seen in all of your experience with that?
As far as produce, lots of times with stories, I don't really worry about finding venues to go and perform these things. Lots of times I will just create the stories because someone has gifted me the story or asked me to go and maybe go and tell these stories. I don't go looking for venues to go and tell these stories. It's like I'll do the research, I'll have fun creating it, I'll do the research, and I've figured out, yes, this is a gem, this is a jewel. And lots of times if I've been invited to something, that I look upon each performance as a custom job, and I always ask the client, what do you want? What are you looking for? What is the objective of why are you asking me to be here? And from there, I'll get an idea of what they're after, and I say, okay, look at my quiver of stories, and go, okay, I got this story, that might fit, and I'll talk to them. Does this story kind of fit what you're looking for? Good, I'll tell that story. I have lots of stories that I rarely tell. I mean, Barbara Kawakami gave me her book on the picture brides from Hawaii and said, I want you to tell these stories. So I selected 5 of them, I crafted them. I may have told them a couple times. But I don't tell them very often because they are a very specific type of story that doesn't quite fit a lot of people. And yet, a lot of these other stories, people ask for them. They hear about these things. We want, to hear these World War II stories. Um, like I said, it's just for me, it's more just it's the creation piece that I'm really interested in, learning more, finding out, because you never know when these things crop up. Like I said, I was just in a play in Kansas City, Kansas, and it was about the Japanese American internment in World War II. And yeah, I was playing a part. I was playing the part of the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. But because I have told these stories for 15, 20 years, and I know a lot of the background, I know a lot of the stories behind the stories. I was almost like a secondary dramaturge, with like they people saying, a lot of these actors saying, well, what was going on here? I was able to tell them, this is what was happening. This is what the feelings were. Here are the facts. Here are the things that, what the attitudes were. And so being able to not only have the story, but understanding the situation around that story. For me, that's fascinating. I enjoyed that. But I would never have been able I would not have been able to go and be part of that play if I hadn't known what it was like to be there and having done the research and know a lot of the stories about not only the main story of the internment, but all the other stories around it.
Right. So you have like this direct and indirect benefit on that. So everybody, you will want to come to this virtual workshop. So this is Saturday, December 2nd, 2023, and it is from 9 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. Mountain Time. But don't worry, there is that link down there, storycrossroads.org/all things story. There is a time zone converter, so no matter what your time zone is, for some reason you can't even make it during the time. Yes, it is recorded, but virtual live is best. But if you have to get the recording, that's possible too. Same place. Go there for details. So until we tell again.